Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. I want to welcome you to another segment of the Jermaine Brown Sports Talk Show. Today is Friday, August the 21st, 2026. Now, there's been a lot of hoopla over this whole quote unquote quarterback competition for the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns. I want to explain to you why Sheduer is not starting. It will not most likely be named the starter come week one. Now, I do think he will ultimately play sometime this season because, unfortunately, Deshaun can never seem to stay healthy. Not as a Cleveland, definitely as a Cleveland Brown, but prior to Cleveland, he had some injury history with Houston. But here's why Shador's not going to start. But before I get into that, let me just add a full disclaimer. I am a Deshaun Watson guy. I've always been since his days at Cleveland. But that's not the reason why I'm saying if I was the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, why I would start Watson over Shador. Because I'm going to be honest with you, and I like Shador personally. I like him. He's a nice dude. He's a good dude. And I felt he should have been named the starter after last season, being that he was the starter. So I would have named him as QB1 going into this offseason, but the Browns did not do that for whatever reason. But I'm going to just put contract aside. I'm going to tell you from a performance based reason why Shador most likely will not be named the starter and why, quite frankly, if we're being really honest with ourselves, he does not deserve to be named the starter. You say, but Jermaine, didn't you just say that he should have been named the starter after last season? Yes, but I'm seeing a disturbing pattern with him that I think is holding him back from being named starter. Let me explain. Now, last year he started 7 games, the last 7 games of the season, and I think he did well overall. However, he only completed 57% of his passes. I want you to remember that 57% of his passes. That's low. Then we go into this offseason. He's competing in a quarterback competition against Deshaun Watson. Now, Watson, throughout his career in Cleveland, let's take Houston aside. Let's just look at his Cleveland career. He's completed over 60% of his passes. I think 61, 62 to be exact, but I don't remember off the top of my head, but above 60%. Plus, he also has a winning record. So that means at least he's giving you as poor as Deshaun has been, mainly due to injuries and the mental stress that I think he went through with all those 25, 26 lawsuits. But at least he's still complete. With all of that, he still completed at least 60% of his passes. And he had a winning record. Now, he's in this quarterback competition with Sheduer Sanders. So Sheduer Sanders came off a season where he only completed 57% of his passes. And I don't count practice reps and all that other stuff and what the quarterback tracker is in practice reps because that could all be manipulated and stuff like that. But here's what cannot be manipulated. They had a preseason game against the Bears. That first preseason game against the Bears, Deshaun Watson completed 73% of his passes, while Sheduer only completed 56% of his passes. Now you would say, yeah, but Jermaine, you got to add the qualifier that, well, first of all, the 57% last year was because he had a lot of drops, and there was a lot of drops, and it was poor offense, and this and that and the other. And there's truth to that. And that does affect your completion percentage. So I'm not going to simply tell you drops and poor offense doesn't affect your completion percentage. It does. But here's the problem with that argument. Dylan Gabriel, who started after game 4, because I think Flacco started the first 4 games. But after game 4, he started at like 5, 6 games. He completed about 60% if you round up 59.5. So I'm rounding up to 60%. He completed 60% of his passes with the same offense, with the same bad players. But we know Dylan Gabriel is not a starting quarterback in the NFL, mainly because of his height and lack of athleticism. So that's why he's not a starting quarterback. So you can't use that excuse last year where he had poor receivers around him and a poor offensive line and poor coaching, which is what he did have around him. But that's not the full excuse, especially when his counterpart, Dylan Gabriel, completed 60% of his passes. Then you look at Jackson Dart. Look at his counterparts in that same draft. Jackson Dart, late first round pick, completed over 60%. I mean, he completed in the high 60s. I think 65, 66%, somewhere around this. Tyler Shaw, who was drafted in the second round by the New Orleans Saints, completed like 67, 68% of his passes. High 60s. Then you had Cam Ward, who was the number one pick in that draft. He completed 60%. Now, that was last season. Dylan Gabriel completed 60%. Why are you completing only 57% of your passes? That's not good. So let's go into the Bears game. Deshaun Watson completes 73% of his passes. Sheduer completes only 56% of his passes against guys who will not make the Bears roster or any other roster in the NFL, or they're going to be on special teams. You should be completing more than 56% of your passes against them. Now let's look at his counterpart on the other side of that game. In that game, Case Keenum, who's the third string quarterback for the Bears. He also went against similar talent that Sheduer went against in that game. Guys who are not going to make the Browns roster or any other roster in the NFL or going to end up on special teams. And what did Case Keenum do? He completed 90% of his passes. See, there's a correlation to this. So that's the Bears game. Then yesterday, they had a joint practice against the Bills. Now, the Bills is one of the top teams in the NFL competing to try to get to a Super Bowl. So this is going to be considered the gold standard of what Cleveland is going against in this preseason. If you're trying to win the starting job of being quarterback one to start the season. Deshaun Watson in that joint practice session, joint practice or joint scrimmage, whatever word you want to use, 70% of his passes he completed. Sheduer Sanders, 70% of his passes, one touchdown, one interception. That was Deshaun Watson's day. Sheduer Sanders, 56% completion percentage. Two touchdowns. I'm going to give him 2 touchdowns, though the stat sheet says 0. I'm giving him 2 touchdowns. But it's not about the touchdowns. It's about the completion percentage. Do you see a disturbing trend or disturbing theory? He completed 57% of his completions last year. And then in the 2 games where he's going head-to-head against another potential starting quarterback, he only completed 57% on one game and 56% on another. When you complete less than 50% or 60% of your passes, folks, you're not a starting quarterback. How do we know? In today's NFL, how do we know? There was 2 other guys who completed less than 60% of their passes. Anthony Richardson from the Colts and J.J. McCarthy. And J.J. McCarthy had a winning record. But notice, Anthony Richardson and J.J. McCarthy got benched by their respective teams and most likely will either be traded or cut in a couple of weeks before the season starts. Because why? If you can't compete complete at least 64% of your passes, Houston, we have a problem. Because when I Googled it up, the average completion rate of all starting quarterbacks in the NFL last year was at 64%. So that means anything below 64% was below average. Anything above 64% is above average because the average is 64. So now imagine if the average is 64 and you're shooting in the low to mid 50s, even high 50s. That's unacceptable in today's NFL as a starting quarterback. Back in the days when you had Cam Newton and Michael Vick, you could have gotten away with that, especially if you're very athletic. But in today, that's why Andy Richardson, he was very athletic and could throw a beautiful deep ball. But because he can't complete at least 60-something% of his passes, this is why Daniel Jones beat him out. He's not playable. And as much as I like Sheduer, he's not playable or viable as a long-term starter when he's completing less than 60% of his passes. He got to get that up to that 64%. I heard a guy on First Things First say, well, there's only two quarterbacks currently, franchise quarterbacks in the NFL who was taken after the fifth round or the fourth round or something like that, who's a franchise quarterback. And that's Dak Prescott and Brock Purdy. Just please look up their completion percentage. That explains why, folks. They have high completion percentages. And these coaches are not going to tell you this. They're not going to tell you that's why he's not playing. And the media certainly will not tell you that's why he's not playing. But that is why Sheduer Sanders is not the starter for the Cleveland Browns. If his completion percentage was 10 points higher from last year, he'd be the starter. If his completion was 10 points higher against the Bears, he would probably beat out Deshaun. If his completion percentage was 10 points higher against the Bills, he probably would beat out Deshaun. But the reason he's not beating out Deshaun is because at least they know as a coach, as bad as Deshaun has been, because again, injuries and the mental issues, he at least completes over 60% of his passes. And in today's NFL, that's what people want. That's what these coaches want. They want you to take the layups. It's not about throwing the ball 10, 15 yards down the field. That's not the requirement of a quarterback. That's what you call the icing on the cake. But I need the cake. And there's three requirements that a quarterback has. There's three rules that you have to do to play the quarterback position in college and in the NFL. Number one, limit turnovers. That's the number one rule. Because if you keep turning the ball over, you're not playable. So limit turnovers. Number two, move the chains. The chains is 10 yards. Okay? So it doesn't matter if it takes 2 plays, 3 plays, 4 plays, or 1 play. Move the chains. And the third thing, put points on the board. And it's until you can do those 3 things, you're not a starting quarterback in the NFL. I'm sorry to say, as much as I like Sheduer Sanders, and Watson is going to most likely start the season. The only way he keeps his job as the starter of the Cleveland Browns, he's going to have to limit his turnovers. He has to move the chains, and he has to put points on the board. And the last thing that's going to be needed is the team's going to have to win some games. That will keep Sheduer at bay. If he gets injured, obviously, and he has an injury history, Sheduer starts. But if he doesn't do those other 3 things, really, if those other 4 things, limit turnovers, move the chains, put points on the board, and win games, Sheduer's going to start. It's eventually he will get a chance to start. That's the way it is in today's NFL. Sorry, whether people like it or not, learn to love it, as Ric Flair would say. This is the reality in today's NFL. This is why Sheduer is not a starting quarterback in today's NFL, folks. I'm just being honest with you. Anthony Richardson and JJ McCarthy both got benched because they could not meet that threshold of at least being above 60% in their completion percentage. And unfortunately, if Sheduer does not get that above 60%, he will suffer the same fate as Anthony Richardson and JJ McCarthy. I want you to subscribe, give me a thumbs up if you like this, comment, let me know what you think. Have a nice day.